So, all right. Let's move on. Did you find somebody? All right. Let's move.
Can I choose one?
Absolutely. Who'd you find?
I want to speak to the Ex-Mormon.
Ooh.
Feel I might have something in common.
All right. Then let's talk to Lane in Utah. Lane, you're live with Eric and Lloyd. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing? Thanks for taking the call.
Hello. It's down to me, basically. I chose you, so you're welcome.
Well, I particularly enjoy that you chose me because it was actually some of your YouTube videos that helped me get out some 6 to 9 months ago.
Oh, so. Fantastic.
Yay!
Wonderful. High five. Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. I appreciate it.
Small victories. Small victories.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you Google something Mormon-related, Jehovah's Witness stuff comes up, so it's just kind of the way it is.
Yeah.
So what do you want to talk about?
But to get to my question, so several times on, I don't know if it was particularly this channel or not. I think I've heard Matt say it a couple times, but that the Mormon church is so obviously false when compared to other religions. Usually I've heard it lumped in with Scientology. And the funny irony to that is that when I was a missionary, I remember reading several books, specifically one called The Great Apostasy that was written by a Mormon apostle. And to me, it was like, oh, the Catholic Church is so obviously false. You know, they had 3 popes at one time. And same thing with Jehovah's Witnesses, like, oh, they messed up the prediction of the end of the world. So my question was, why do outsiders, when I say outsiders, I mean non-Mormons, look at Mormons in that light? What's the argument behind that?
So I can be absolutely clear, we've labelled your call that you are an ex-Mormon, and your question is why would outsiders find it ridiculous that some dude uncovered some golden plates in a wood and used a stone and managed to come up with a book, and I've seemed to have misplaced the golden plates, and just help me understand where you're coming from with this.
Yeah, totally. So I mean, I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate here, right? Because obviously I don't believe any of that stuff. But what's interesting to me is that it seems more ridiculous to everyone else than other religions, when to me, even after having left the faith, it seems fairly equally ridiculous.
Yeah.
When compared to the Old Testament or even just compared to other more modern religions like Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever.
I actually think that the Book of Mormon is an excellent kind of example in microcosm of how a quote-unquote sacred text can just be manufactured and immediately taken seriously. And if this can happen of a document that was written under such clearly dubious circumstances in the 19th century, why shouldn't the same be true of documents that were found or were being circulated in the Middle East centuries ago? So I find it fascinating. It's a great example to point to of people just immediately investing trust in a document just because a charismatic leader or set of leaders, in the case of Christianity, say this is God's word, and people somehow are able to fall for it for reasons that I've gone into in the past. But yeah, people are able to follow along with that sort of ideology.
Sure. So one of the struggles so originally, I mean, we can assume that in the beginning of the church, whoever fell for whatever Joseph Smith was selling, it was probably more due to his charisma than anything else. But obviously, no one these days would have had that kind of contact with him. And for people like me, it was just that, you're brought up knowing that, or being taught that the Book of Mormon is true. And in order to get out, you have to be able to prove to yourself that it's not true.
Yeah.
Right. Which is obviously something that's basically impossible. We can't prove that there's no God. We have no good reason to assume there is. But
almost.
Yeah.
It depends.
What,
like if you believe that there's a God that lives in your pocket that you can take out and introduce to people, we can look in your pockets. So in that way, there are ways that you can test depending on the God claim. Just
I think if you're
throwing that out,
if your introduction to Mormonism is through Mormon parents, the likelihood of you taking it seriously is going to be infinitely more likely than if your introduction to Mormonism is South Park. And that's
right.
That's the basic mechanics of how religion works. Really, it's through child indoctrination, which if you think about it, is a deeply exploitative way of perpetuating wrong ideas by hijacking the developmental stage of children and embedding this coding when they're too young to apply critical thinking.
Sure, which, that applies to, obviously that applies to every religion. I guess my contention, and kind of the point I'm trying to make here is, for instance, just looking at the Book of Mormon, it was hard for me, 9 months or so when I actually decided to leave the church. It was hard to look at the Book of Mormon and prove that it was, or look at it and say, this is obviously false when compared to the Old Testament and the New Testament, because especially in the Mormon church, we look at those other texts in the Bible and say, these were mistranslated. That's why there's all these ridiculous things in there that make no sense. So there's actually an explanation for the contradictions. But the Book of Mormon, being written in more modern times by Joseph Smith, while obviously it still has ridiculous things, it actually seems to me...
The Amalekites, the anti-Nephites.
It seems to be less contradictory.
Well, so I think I'm going to probably sound like a broken record by the end of today. Education. It's providing resources. So there are some amazing resources that are out there. The Ex-Mormon community is growing, and it is fucking awesome. There are podcasts that I try to listen to whenever I get the chance, including the My Book of Mormon podcast. There are websites like Mormon Leaks and
Mormon Stories podcast.
Yeah. And the more people investigate and talk about it, the more that we can help give those kinds of educational tools. But I think that's probably the best way we're going to get through it, because nobody the saying, right? Being wrong feels exactly like being right. If you say, "Oh, this is ridiculous," it can cause people to become more entrenched. And it's hard to kind of look back at your own history and go, I can't believe I saw it that way. But what you need to do is you need to practice some self
introspection.
Well, it's not just introspection; it's forgiveness.
Yeah.
It's care.
Yeah.
It's okay. Because it takes a long time. And Lane, this may or may not apply to you, but because it takes time to work through it. Some compassion for yourself is all right too.
It's okay to believe absurd things if that's the only information you had to go on.
Yeah, but with that said, we're glad you called in. Alrighty, so who are we going to talk to?